Hello and welcome to the BI WizKid YouTube channel. Mapping visuals in Power BI have always been quite basic and a bit of an issue. There's never been a massive amount of analysis that you can do, and every time you try and push the visual to its limits, you sort of get to a solution, but it's not fully complete. But not anymore. James Dales, a London-based developer and professional, has gone about to create his very own mapping visual for Power BI. And let me tell you, it is absolutely fantastic. We were lucky enough to have James join us for a live session at the Leeds Power BI Data and Analytics user group in May 24, where he showcased his brand new Icon Map Pro visual. He showed us step by step the challenges he was facing with the original Power BI visuals, and then went about showcase his Icon Map Pro, highlighting the various use cases that he can have in this demo heavy session that he did for us. So this is quite a special session, so strap yourselves in for this one. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and if you like the video, please like and comment, helping share the content with other users. So without further ado, here we have James Dales with Geospatial Analytics with his brand new Icon Map Pro visual. Hashtag Bo.
Okay, who makes start? Sheb's done a pretty good introduction, so I'm going to save the time talking about me and talk about Power BI instead. What am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about mapping, geospatial analytics. We'll kick off by talking about what the options are in Power BI out of the box for mapping, different types of visualization that we can create with them, and then we'll talk about how we go beyond those and produce some more advanced stuff to try and, I guess, create our clients' requirements. So what are our options then for maps in Power BI? Well, we're pretty lucky. Out of the box, we've got 5 map visuals in Power BI, or at least at first glance, it looks like we're pretty lucky. But, well, let me run through them. We've got map visual, we've got field map, we've got shape map, we've got ArcGIS maps, and we've got Azure maps, all come out of the box. But it's literally just 2 years ago that Microsoft was actually here in the UK over at SQLBits conference. They announced that they were going to retire these first 3 visuals and take all of that functionality and build it into the Azure Maps visual. It's probably a good thing because these first 2 are built on the really old Bing Maps API, which has been completely deprecated by Microsoft. It's not used on Bing Maps anymore. It's a really old API. And if you actually go to Bing Maps, you now usually see Azure Maps mapping instead. And then the shape map. Shape map's been in preview almost since the dawn of time. If you're familiar with it, it allows you to bring in your own bespoke boundaries, your geographies, like custom sales territories or local authority areas, perhaps, and then shape in different colors. But there's no background map behind it. It's just the outlines on their own. And it's never come out to preview, and now we know it's never going to. So I'm not going to talk about those first 3, which leaves us with these 2. ArcGIS maps and Azure maps. Now, ArcGIS maps is interesting. It's interesting because despite the fact it comes with Power BI, it isn't actually created by Microsoft. In all intents and purposes, it's a custom visual that Microsoft have agreed to bundle with the product. It's created by a company called Esri, who are a specialist mapping company. But really, to get the benefit out of it, you need an Esri ArcGIS subscription. It does have some free functionality, but nothing really that you can't do with the other visuals. And I don't have an ArcGIS subscription, so, or at least I've used all the credit up on my free one this month already, and it's only the 9th. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. Instead, I'm going to focus on Azure Maps. So let's jump out of PowerPoint and start building some maps in the Power BI desktop. Where's my mouse gone? Can't live without a mouse. Let's close PowerPoint. So this is Power BI desktop. Obviously, before I can start building any maps, we need some data. It's no different to any other type of dashboard. So I've imported some data. It's one of my favorite data sets that I like to build demos with. It's open data. So I've gone to data.police.uk and I've downloaded 1 month of crime data for the whole of England. So for all 43 police forces in England, I've downloaded all of the crime that occurred in March 2023. So just over a year ago. And this is what it looks like. So each row in this crime table represents an individual crime that has occurred somewhere in England. And that somewhere is represented by the longitude and latitude columns. So those are the coordinates. And it's actually not the coordinate of exactly where that crime occurred. It's not, you know, Joe Bloggs' house was burgled. But it's relatively precise. Just for a little bit of privacy, it's the centre of the street where that crime occurred. So it does mean if you get 5 burglaries in one street, they're all going to have the same longitude and latitude. Now I've got a location field. It's not particularly useful. It says things like on or near shopping centre or on or near car park, that kind of thing. It's not enough information to actually turn into a street address, but it gives us a bit more context. Then I've got something called the LSOA code. Is anybody familiar with these? Oh, quite a few nods. Last week when I did this, it was silence. So LSOA code stands for Lower Super Output Area. And it's basically a statistical geography. It's like bigger than a few postcodes, but much, much smaller than a local authority area. And this will be quite important for us today. So I'll come back to these in a bit. And then I've got crime type, what the outcome was of the investigation. Not too interested in those for the point of view of mapping. I've got crime count. Now, I've added this column basically because I'm lazy and I don't like doing DAX in front of an audience. It just means I can just do an easy sum. I can sum up by crime type or whatever, and it'll tell me how many crimes have occurred of that type without me having to write any DAX at all. And then I've also created this last column, which is actually a text field, and it's just the longitude and latitude concatenated into a single field. And I'll explain why this is quite useful as we go through. But it's literally those two fields merged together. What it gives us is a unique ID for where that location occurred. It's the only unique field we have in that row that describes the location. I've got another table. This one, so the first one came from data.police.uk. The second one came from the Office for National Statistics GeoPortal. And the nice thing is it starts with that lower super output area code, and then it goes up the hierarchy. So it'll take me through to like the local authority area or the police forces or the region, which part of the UK that crime occurred in. And they're simply joined together on that LSOA code. So let's start building some maps. So we'll pull on the Azure Maps visual. And then in my crime data, we've got latitude and longitude, right? So let's drag those in.
So you don't have to pay any money for Azure Maps. It's built in, it's free.
Azure Maps is built in and free. As long as you're using it inside of Power BI, you don't have to pay anything for it. It doesn't work in publish to web just yet. As of last week, it now works in Power BI embedded. And obviously it works in the service and it works in desktop. So I've dragged on longitude and latitude, and at first glance, it looks like it's put a little circle for every single row of my data, showing me where the crimes are. But that's a really dangerous assumption, because if I mouse over, what we've actually got down here is that little eye symbol. And if I click on that, what it's telling us is that we've actually given the map visual too much data. Now, almost all visuals in Power BI can only support 30,000 rows of data. And we've actually given it more than 500,000 rows of data. Okay, there's 588,000 crimes or something like that that occurred in that month. And what it said it's doing is it's prioritizing the points of data that don't overlap, that aren't hidden by other points of data. So if I'm trying to understand where clusters of crimes are occurring, it's not telling me that because it's taken those points away, because it's taken away the ones that are close to each other. So we need a strategy of reducing the amount of data that we're trying to put on the map at any one time. And it's no different to any other type of visual in Power BI. What do we do to reduce the amount of data? Well, the first thing we can do is filter it. So in my little hierarchy here, I've got the region. So we can have a look at London, or the North East, or Yorkshire, as we're in Leeds. I'm actually going to stick with London for a reason, and I'll explain that for a moment. Now, it looks like it's done a pretty good job. To me, this looks like the outline of London. Looks like I might have all of my points on there, but let's check. Let me just drag on a little card visual, and if I drag on any field, to be fair, and do a count, that will tell me how many rows of data we're looking at the moment. And there's actually still 85,000 rows of data, but we know the visual can only display 30,000. So actually, this is only a representation of less than half of my data. So we're not there yet. We've still got a bit of an issue. If I switch this to distinct count, now remember I created this field, that combined field that joins our long and latitudes together. Now, if I do distinct count, it shows me that there's actually only just over 30,000 distinct locations in London where a crime has occurred. And we know our visual can display 30,000 rows of data. So I'm actually only going to be short of 660 locations rather than 55,000 locations. So what I can do is I can drag on that landlocked combined field into the location well here, and then for my latitude and longitude, I can change those to be averages. And of course, what's the average of a value on one row? Well, it doesn't change. The latitudes and longitudes won't change because they're only on one row. So now I've got my map back, but we're displaying 30,000 points. And you can pretty much see it started here on the right, gone across, and then we've got this vertical line here where we've hit 30,000. And I'm guessing the 660 points are here. So we're not quite there yet. But if I drag the crime count into the size field, this forces Power BI to change the algorithm that it uses behind the scenes to pick which 30,000 rows it's using. So without it, it just uses the first 30,000 rows that were given to it. But by dragging a measure in, what that now does is it samples that data. So it uses the same algorithm as it did before, trying to hide the ones that are overlaid, but actually it's not hiding that much. It's only hiding some of 660 out of 30,000. So the impact will be much, much smaller. And bringing that data in, you can see we've got this great big bubble here over Heathrow Airport representing a whole load of crime that was completely hidden from us before. So we're starting to get there. I'm happier that we haven't lost most of my data set now. We're getting a better representation, but we're still looking at a mess. It's not showing us anything yet. So we can try and change the formatting a little bit to clean things up. Maybe I could make the minimum bubble size smaller. And then if I zoom in on the map, it's a little bit easier to see where those clusters of crimes are. But if I zoom out, it's not that easy to see what's going on. So I need to employ another technique. And actually, Simon talked about drill downs a few times in your session. So as we're now averaging our longitudes and latitudes, what we can also do is, as well as that lat-log combined field, I can bring in that lower super output area and the local authorities into the location field. And what that's now doing is it's averaging up all of those longitudes and latitude points within each local authority. So the circles are now appearing, one for each local authority, in the middle of where all the crimes occurred for that local authority, which is pretty much going to be in the middle point for each local authority. And we can see here we've got this great big circle over Westminster. And because we've created that hierarchy, we've got the drill down options turned on. So if I drill down into there, and we can see we've got this great big circle over the Houses of Parliament, no surprise. And also this one here, which if I drill down all the way down to those individual crime locations, we can see that we've got a whole load of crime appearing there, which I think is probably on top of Oxford Street. So we've gone from having 30,000 rows of data, a big unintelligible mess, to being able to get some real insight and understanding that one of the hotspots for crime in London is Oxford Street. So that's quite nice for understanding the detail. But it's still a mess when I'm trying to view the whole of London at the same time. So there's other things that we can do to try and understand the big picture. And something that Microsoft added a couple of months ago is the ability to cluster. So now, instead of it drawing 30,000 circles, it's drawn a more sensible number of circles, but we can't read any of the numbers in there without going in and tweaking the formatting options. For some reason, the defaults don't work. So if I increase the circle size to 20 pixels, we can now see that behind this circle, there's 1.3 thousand crimes. And I can either click on that, and it will zoom in and show us some more, or I can just zoom in on the map until we get all the way back down to that detail. But I'm not a big fan of this because there's 4,700 crimes behind this circle, and there's 2 crimes behind this circle. They look the same. So for this scenario, it's not that helpful. So what else can we do? Well, if we have a look at other options, we could turn bubbles off completely. And we have the option of 3D columns, which normally I wouldn't be a big fan of, but actually for this purpose, we may need to tweak the settings again. Oh no, it's magically changed. It has actually identified, I don't know if you've seen this before, it's kind of a 3D mode, so the map's tilted and then you can move the map around, zoom in and out, and examine it a little bit in 3D. But it has highlighted that we've got this peak of crime here in Westminster, and there's Heathrow with those big circles that you could see before. But it's not great. It's probably not the way I would choose to see this data. Probably one of the better ways with Azure Maps of viewing a lot of data whilst you zoomed out is to use the heat map. But again, by default, it's not really particularly useful. But if we just tweak the formatting settings slightly, so if we change the radius from 20 to 5, and then let's tweak the colors, take Simon's point on accessibility, and we'll go from blue through to yellow through to red, rather than starting with green. And now we can see, zooming in, we can kind of see where those hotspots are, and there's that area around Westminster showing up quite nicely. But now when I zoom all the way in, it's not really very useful anymore. I've now lost all of the detail. So let's compromise. Let's say that when I'm looking at a wide area like this, we're going to use a heat map. But then when I zoom in to say zoom level 12, so in maps, zoom levels start at 0, and that's the whole world. And then 22 is all the way into detailed building level. So if I say at zoom level 12, it's roughly slightly more than halfway in, but it's a decent amount. If I set the max zoom level for 12 for the heat map, when I get to this point, it'll disappear. So what I'm going to do is turn my bubble layer back on, turn the clusters off, and then on the zoom settings for the bubble layer, I'm going to set the minimum to be 12. So it should disappear again. And now, as I zoom in on the heat map, just at the point I'm starting to want to get to the detail, we now get the bubbles back. And what we could also do is change the conditional formatting on here to be based on the crime count and do the same kind of colouring as we have on the heat map. And we'll keep that consistency of view. So that update, zoom back in again, and then hopefully we'll get some of those larger bubbles. Up there's the one over Oxford Street, nice and red in your face. There's all the crime. So this is starting to get a bit better. I'm a bit happy with this. What I would really like, though, is a bit of a compromise, and I'd like to understand which local authorities we're looking at as we zoom into the data. Now, Azure Maps has the ability to add a reference layer in here. So I can pick a file to upload. So I've got the local authority boundaries for London here as a little GeoJSON file. So if I add that on, by zooming, you can now see that we've got the local authority boundaries overlaid, well, underlaid behind our data points. But we can't format them. The choice is blue or blue. Well, actually, it's not even a choice of the shade of blue or how transparent it is. And luckily, we're over land. If I was trying to plot my, my polygons over the sea, then they're not going to show up at all. So I would like some formatting options in here, and I'd like some labels to tell me which local authorities they were. There's no tooltips or anything on these. So it's not hugely useful, but it's better than nothing. And that's a quick summary of the majority of the functionality in Azure Maps. Let me jump back to PowerPoint. But what I'd actually like to do with those local authority boundaries is colour them based on the amount of crime that occurred in those areas to create something called a choropleth map. But there's all sorts of other things I might want to do with maps in Power BI. I might not want to be limited to Azure Map backgrounds. Perhaps I work for an organisation that's got its own map servers that has some real specific detail in that I want to expose. Or maybe I work for a UK public sector organisation that has access to Ordnance Survey maps for free, as most do. I like Ordnance Survey maps in Power BI. Perhaps I work for a utility company, and I want my gas pipelines or my water pipes or my electricity wires represented in Power BI with my KPIs as to, where my water's leaking or where I'm discharging sewage this week on the map. Or perhaps I want to cluster the data in a different way and represent that. Or maybe I just want to put some pictures on the map. Maybe I work for a supermarket and I want to understand where my competitors are by putting competitor logos around me. Or maybe I want to track assets like where are my delivery vans, where are my ships, where are my planes, where are my cars, that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of other use cases that I want to develop in Power BI, but I can't do any of those with the out-of-the-box visuals. So what do we do? Well, in Power BI, we're pretty lucky. as Simon showed the 3D warehouse, we have the ability to add custom visuals. So where the out-of-the-box visuals have their limitations, we can then go to third parties to use more specific, more advanced, sometimes more niche capabilities. Now, we're pretty lucky for maps. There's actually more than 20 custom visuals available to do mapping in Power BI. But with all custom visuals in Power BI, they're of really varying quality. Now, I happen to know that these two are the most popular. Mapbox is interesting in the same way as Esri is produced by a specialist mapping company. Mapbox are a specialist mapping company that produced a visual for Power BI. The only problem with the Mapbox visual, despite the fact it's got a whole load of really great capabilities, it was built quite a long time ago now, using an old Mapbox API and also an old Power BI API that is no longer supported. And the two people in Mapbox who built the visual no longer work at Mapbox. In fact, one of them, I think, is lead engineer for Google Maps now. And as such, Mapbox have stopped supporting this visual. It's actually been taken on by a third-party company in Eastern Europe somewhere who've just, because it's open source, taken the code. So if you go to AppSource now and look at Mapbox, it's not actually published by Mapbox anymore. It's this other company. And my concern is because it's using those old APIs that at some point it'll either stop working or they're going to have to do a complete rebuild of the visual to keep it functional. And when I prepped this session a few weeks ago, I was planning on demoing some of the great capabilities that are in Mapbox, because there really are some. But a lot of functionality I was planning on showing wasn't working anymore. So I think it's a slightly dangerous option. Icon Map, on the other hand, is a visual that I built 6 or 7 years ago. It's now in its third iteration in AppSource. Who's heard of Marco Russo? Anybody know Marco Russo? The DAX expert, runs a training company, SQL BI. But he also runs a custom visuals company called OKViz. And he appeared on a webinar that I happened to watch last month. And he talked about free visuals in the custom visuals marketplace becoming a bit of a victim of our own success. And this is kind of what's happened to Icon Map. So Icon Map is now pretty much as popular as some of those out-of-the-box visuals. And unfortunately, because of its level of popularity, also in equal amounts is the amount of support requests that are now coming through to me on a daily basis. So there isn't a day that goes past that I don't get probably around 10 requests for help. And these aren't the visuals broken. These are, how do I do this with a map in Power BI? And you can guarantee that it's nothing to do with the map. All of the problems are in the underlying data model. And these aren't quick things that I can help people with without spending hours and hours a day. And it's kind of become unsustainable. So this is really where Decantis has come out of. So my plan is to stop supporting Icon Map. I'm not going to take it away. It's still going to be there in the marketplace. But I'm in the process of building a new visual. I left my consulting job, set up a new company, Decantis, with the aim of focusing on geospatial analytics on the Microsoft platform, not just in Power BI, but also broader in Fabric. And as part of that, I'm building a new map visual that will be properly supported with a team of people rather than me trying to do it in my spare time. To give you a bit of an idea, the old Icon Map was downloaded in the last 12 months more than 250,000 times. So you can imagine then, if that's just report builders, then how many people on top of that are using the visual? I mean, it's got to be easily in its millions. So it's, it generates a lot of support. So I thought I would, how am I doing for time? Oh, good. spend a few minutes giving a bit of a preview as to what I'm building and how it overcomes some of those challenges and enables some of those other types of map visuals that we might want to build in Power BI. So let's jump out of PowerPoint. That's actually my last slide. I only have 4. And let's open up Power BI Desktop again. So exactly the same data set. Not going to introduce a new set of data just yet. So we'll stick with crime. There's plenty going on in crime, right? Neos just take longer and longer to open every day, especially in front of an audience. Still going. Right, here we are. So we're back where we were, except this time I've got my in progress version of the visual available to us in the custom visual section. So let's add Iconmat Pro onto the page. And we'll configure it just the same way as we were before. Let's do long lat combined. Let's bring in longitude and latitude and pull on crime count. Oops, into too many fields, into circle size. And there's our bubbles over London. And of course, what we've got is this vertical line again, hitting the 30,000 point mark. Except, I'll find my mouse. What I can do here is, well, let's bring in more than 30,000 rows. 60,000 should cover it, right? Ah, there we go. And now we've got those big circles back over Heathrow Airport. But this is all the data. We haven't got that little eye symbol. We're not trying to make up those last 660 records. This is all of the data. So I've increased the limit. We can now pull in up to 180,000 rows, which is fine for circles, just about. Do it with complex polygons and things are going to get a bit slow. So use with caution, but where you need to, you can bring in more data. And of course, when we've got lots of data like this and want to view it in different ways, well, we talked about clustering. Let's turn on clusters. I've added a little bit of extra formatting on the clusters, which you can see without changing the default size, by the way. But this one's got 2, right? Like it had back on the Azure Maps visual, versus this one that's got 1,676, but they're different colors. So you can tell straight away the difference in the circles. And as you mouse over them, it also shows you the area underneath represented by that circle. And of course, you can click on them to get into the detail until you get all the way down to the individual points. And if you don't want the different colors, then of course it's all configurable. You can change all of the colors, or you can turn that polygon on and off if you want as well. So let's take that field out to circle size. It does heat maps, but we've done heat maps. What if we want to cluster our points in a different way? Well, Uber have created something called H3 that divides up the whole planet into a grid of hexagons at varying levels of detail, which has become a really popular way of aggregating up really large amounts of data. So let's turn that on. And let's just do a quick bit of configuration. So I'm going to change the resolution, which is settable by conditional formatting. So you can have a slicer, or you can base it on your drill down level, depending how you want to show it. Or in this case, just for speed, I'm going to do it as a fixed size. And we can change the coloring, I don't know, to be similar to how we had the heat map, maybe something like that. And then you can see all of those different crimes are now clustered into the hexagons, and we've got that concentration over Westminster. But that's all very well. But the way I really wanted to present the data with those local authority boundaries shaded in by amount of crime in each local authority. So let's take off the longitudes and latitudes and instead bring in the local authority code. To pull it into two places for now. And then back in the data layers, I'm going to say I want a shapefile. And I can either bring that in from an external URL, or I can upload a local file. Now, unfortunately, Microsoft don't give me, as a third-party developer, the nice little upload file button down here. It's just not an option. So I've kind of had to do a bit of a hack to work around that. So if I click the little toggle button here, let me expand these out so you can read them. It says display file upload button. Turn that on, and then it puts this button here that we can click. And then I get the option to pick my file.
And one of the support requests that come in every now and then.
So the ability to have upload local files has been the biggest request I've ever had. But it's a real pain to develop because of that. And if you've ever used the old icon map to do this, it's a real pain. So these files have come from the Office for National Statistics GeoPortal. And in the old world, we had to convert them to GeoJSON. But before we could convert them to GeoJSON, in the Office for National Statistics portal, they're not in longitudes and latitudes. They're in British National Grid coordinates in a different projection. So we have to download the file. Then you have to upload it into a third-party tool like QGIS or MapShaper, change the projection to be longitudes and latitudes. And these files can be massive. And they're made up of loads and loads and loads and loads of points, which in either shape map or the old icon map, if you load them in as they were, it would freeze the visual and it would hang because it was just too complicated for Power BI to deal with. So what Icon Map Pro does is it does all of those steps for you behind the scenes. So you upload your shapefile, it changes the projection for you, it simplifies it, and it converts it to GeoJSON. All behind the scenes, it does it for you without you really noticing. So let me move back out to the whole of the country. So now I've got all of my different local authority outlines, and you'll notice some are in blue. So these are the ones that have matched my crime data, because I had crime data, if you remember, for England, but not for Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So the ones in blue is where it's matched the crime. The ones in grey are where it hasn't matched crime data. So if I want, I can tell it not to display those ones that haven't matched. So now we just focused on England. And to make the choropleth bit, all we need to do is just use standard Power BI conditional formatting on the crime count. And let's change the outline color as well. And now we can see the local authorities with the deeper shades of blue are the ones with more crime, which are Birmingham and Leeds. Or at least in March 2023 they were. So this is starting to give me a better picture. You know, I can filter as well to zoom into the different areas. If we just want to focus on Yorkshire, we can do that if we want to. But what if I want to get into the detail? Where in Leeds is all of this crime happening? Yeah, I would guess so too. Should we find out? So let's also pull in the lower super output areas. So creating that geographic hierarchy. And then I can go back into the options for the shapefile and say that I want 2 levels of drill down, which gives me a second little toggle here to upload my lower super output area boundaries. And these really are big because there are lots and lots and lots of them for the whole country. So it will take just a minute to process that. And then hopefully, if it's done that, I should be able to drill down into Leeds and see that, yes, in fact, it is right in the city centre. Let me change the formatting on those so we can see through. There we go. right in Leeds city centre that crime's occurring, or we can zoom back out and double check, because we know that down in London we had Westminster. Zoom into Westminster and we should see, yeah, these two areas over Oxford Street and Houses of Parliament are in darker blue.
All the MPs were in their 20s.
Must be. So I've created my choropleth map in Power BI. About to run out of time. Let me whiz through some other scenarios then that I've already made that show some other options. So as well as drawing polygons, if we've got source longitude and latitude and destination longitude and latitude, you can draw a line on the map. So this is all of the different airline routes for every single airline in the world. So this is representing all of the different routes flown by British Airways, but I can choose, I don't know, Aer Lingus. I don't even know, haven't heard of half of these airlines, but I'll just pick some at random. And you can see that it's drawing all of those routes. And when we draw a line on the map, obviously we've got all of the different formatting options. We can choose the color, the width, the transparency, the pattern of the line as well. It doesn't need to be solid, all through conditional formatting. And the same applies to polygon fills as well. And you don't need a solid fill on the polygon as well. Simon talked a lot about the use of color and color blindness. Often on the map, it's really hard to tell the different colors as well. So you might want to consider using different types of hatching to represent different areas. That's all configurable too. And the lines can be, in this case, they're following the curvature of the Earth from the shortest distance, but they could just be normal curved or straight. Got your problem now of not getting rid of the bar at the top. So they were all of the aircraft routes. Let me do this one full screen. This is good. This is never a good demo to do in the last session of the day. So up in my attic at home, I've got a little Raspberry Pi, and it's listening to all of the aircraft transponders as they fly over my house. There aren't too many planes in the sky at 8 o'clock at night, but this is a live view of where all the planes are kind of over the London area. So you should see this update roughly every 5 seconds. You'll see the planes move around as I pick up the new locations. So this is drawing images on the map, and it's a different image based on the different type of aircraft. And you can use conditional formatting to rotate those images around. So in this case, we can make the planes point in the direction that they're traveling by having a single image and then using the compass bearing to rotate the image around through however many 360 degrees. And we're also generating a line string as well, so you can see the history that those planes have flown. This time of night, things are pretty direct. If we looked at this at 8 o'clock in the morning, you'd see all of the circles of all of the aircraft circling as they wait to land at Heathrow. And we can check that. Let me get rid of a couple of those tabs. So I showed earlier that H3 clustering. Now, all of that processing was done with the longitudes and latitudes inside of the map visual. So it could only deal with 180,000 points because that's the maximum I can process in the visual. But let me take this little slicer off here. So I'm actually doing the processing this time using Microsoft Fabric's real-time analytics Custo engine. So all of those planes that we showed earlier were generating longitude and latitude records every 5 seconds. So maybe 100 rows every 5 seconds if I've got 100 rows on the 100 planes on the screen. Well, I've been recording those for months and months and months. So let me make this full screen again. You can just about make out that as a result, I've now got 360 million rows of data representing all of the locations that those planes have flown that I've picked up from my little Raspberry Pi above my house. So I've used Microsoft Fabric's spatial clustering capabilities, which also supports these H3 hexagons. So all of the processing is now done on the Fabric server side, and I'm just throwing into my visual the individual IDs of each of these hexagons, of which there's about 120,000 that are in the range of my house. So I can display 360 million rows of aggregated to data as 120,000 hexagons. So you can see these are the paths coming into Heathrow Airport where most of the planes are shown. So it's a really nice way of showing where all the noisy bits of airspace are that you don't want to buy a house underneath. Right, let me just got a couple more, but I think it's worth showing them. Get out of full screen. So when I showed the local authority boundaries before, we're all right for time, a couple of minutes ago. When I showed the local authority boundaries before, it's not good, where's fit to page, there we are, full screen, that's what I wanted. I uploaded those shape files, right, that I downloaded from the internet, which is great if we're only looking at one point of time, or they're small enough that we can reasonably fit all of the data and store it in our Power BI model. But these local authority boundaries change over time. So in this report, I pulled in all of the house price data for London for, well, 25, 30 years. So I've got, I don't know, probably 100 million rows of data in here. And over those 30 years, these local authority boundaries have changed. Some local authorities merged, some incorporate other bits. And it'd be quite nice to have a slicer that we can change the date and it show the appropriate boundary. But if I've just uploaded a static file, that's not going to work. And I certainly don't want 30 years worth of different boundaries. So the other approach that we can take is to store those boundaries in our Power BI data model, which if we're using SQL Server or Snowflake or Postgres or some of the other databases, or even just as a text file, but those other databases have a native data type called geography that if you spit out that data straight into your Power BI data model, drag it into the visual, it natively understands those geography data types and will plot them as polygons on the screen. And just to show you the power of that, if I jump into Lambeth here, and actually let me use my little bookmark here to change the map objects. Anything in colour that's now drawn on this map has come out of the database. It's not part of the map background layer. So every single park, tree, house, road sign, traffic light, whatever it is all part of my Power BI data set. So I can filter, for example, if I wanted to say, show me all of the schools, and it will just highlight those pink schools, for example, because they're just in the data set. It also means that I've got tooltips on all of these objects. So if I want to see what this school is, I can see it's Highbury Grove School. I've got a little report page tooltip on here. But the coolest thing is, I think, is I can use a little lasso tool and just drag around an individual set of houses, and it will update my chart here to show me the house price change over the 30 years for these specific houses that I've selected. So obviously I've loaded in millions and millions and millions of polygons into the database, which would be far too big to have as a shapefile. So I've pulled this data in from OpenStreetMap data, which I saw today is now at just under 2 terabytes of data. There's no way you could pull all of that into a report. But with the techniques I showed earlier for drill down and filtering, there's no reason why you can't expose all of that data in your Power BI report with some very careful modeling. Right, last couple of examples, and then I'll bring it to a close. So I talked about the example of an energy company. So this is more open data. So this is the Canadian city of Victoria has made all of their water mains network available as open data. So all of those blue lines represent the water mains under the city, and we can bring in other things. So if I want to bring in all of the pipes that then go to the individual houses, which is a bit of conditional formatting to show those in light blue, we can see all of the individual pipes going in, and then the little red circles are hydrants. Which means with all of this data, we can do some cool stuff. So I showed selecting items on the map and impacting other visuals on the report, but of course it works the other way too. In fact, it doesn't work the other way too necessarily in Azure Maps because it doesn't support highlighting. It only supports filtering. So if you do change visual interactions on your report, you only get the option to filter, not to highlight, which then means you lose the rest of the context of what else is going on your map. So if I wanted, in this example, to view all of the residential pipes that were under the jurisdiction of Victoria City, that were made out of cast iron, that were over 100 years old, I can highlight all of those pipes. And then with my tooltips, I can mouse over them to see if there's, I'll find some with some comments, hopefully. Let me pick up one at random. There we go. We've got some on there with, some inspection comments and what have you. And condition. This is all real data that's made available. And then finally, not that one. I'll show one last one, because on most of these examples, I've shown just one type of object at a time, but there's no reason that you can't have polygons and lines and circles and hexagons all on the same map. So this is two data sets that I've made filterable, or sliceable, I guess. So I've pulled in data for the whole of the UK, and it's deprivation data. So we're here centered on Leeds. I could view more than Leeds, but let's stick with Leeds. And the choropleth map behind is currently showing deprivation based on employment, but I could switch it to crime, or I could switch it to deprivation based on income, so you can see where the wealthy parts of Leeds are versus the poorer parts. And then at the moment, I've overlaid hospitals. This is from, I can't remember which government department makes that available, and I've downloaded from the Care Quality Commission all of their database, so we can have a look at where all the dentists are in Leeds, for example. Plenty of dentists. What about I don't know, nursing homes? So we can overlay different types of points on top of our heat map to show the relation between the two. So this is my project at the minute. That's Icon Map Pro, which I should have available in AppSource by the end of this month. We're nearly there with it. It's been a busy few weeks, but it's just about there. Getting lots of interest. Already got some customers signed up, so hopefully we'll make all of those different use cases possible and importantly supported. So I don't have airlines ringing me up late in the evening expecting me to get out of bed and say we don't know where our planes are. Sorry, yeah, questions?
Can you embed it?
Yes, yeah, but not with the AppSource version. So if you want a version that's embeddable, you just need to contact me, and I have to provide you with a bespoke version, just because commercial versions of visuals in AppSource none of them can support embedding. So you just need to come to me and we'll give you a version. So I'm already talking to a customer about an embedded version for them.
You've got a customer that do like shipping lanes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, perfect for that. Sorry? How much market? Well, embedded's a bit different because we need to understand. So on AppSource, it's a per user per month licensing model, and Microsoft behind the scenes handle all of the licensing. So sort of pricing we've got in mind for that is about starting at the most expensive as $5 per user per month, and then getting cheaper the more you buy. Embedded, we can't limit it to specific users, so we need to kind of understand your usage. Because actually, one thing I didn't talk about or show, but I can't remember who it was that asked me at the beginning, is Azure Maps free? Well, it is free, but actually it's not free to the Power BI team at Microsoft. There's a lot of cross-charging that goes on behind the scenes, and they have to pay the Azure Maps team for the use of all of the background maps. Now, as a third party, obviously, I've got to produce background maps because you can't have a map visual without a map. So the options are, well, I can't use OpenStreetMap servers because they're not supposed to be used for large-scale commercial visuals. I could piggyback on third-party services like Azure Maps and factor that into the cost of the visual, or I can build my own background maps in the same way as Azure Maps build theirs. So I've kind of done both. I won't go through all of these, but you can see when you choose the background map source, you've got a choice of our servers, but also you could use Azure Maps, you could use Esri, you can use Mapbox, you can use Google Maps, all those Ordnance Survey maps that I showed before. If you're public sector, the cool thing with those is you can get all the way into the the individual details of all of the street furniture.
So just to clarify, your licensing is $5 per user or cheaper?
Yes.
Okay. And the second question is, if we're in a heavily regulated industry and there's an InfoSec committee, a technical design authority or something even bigger, saying, how dare you try and expose our data to a third-party visualization firm?
Yeah.
What would the canned response to that be?
Yeah, we get this a lot. So, firstly, none of the data that you drag in here goes out to the visual. Key principle, I don't want it going out because that stops people buying it. It's the reason people don't use Azure Maps, because it can go outside the region.
And that's not just a spoken promise, that's because it's a Microsoft certified visual.
No, so you can't have certification on commercial visuals.
Okay.
So to answer your question, what we would do under an NDA is share the source code for the visual with our ITsec team, just for the purposes of checking it to make sure that there's no outside calls that do that. So it's one of the reasons that I was keen to do it under a company, is then we can have a proper formal NDA and do that.
And if the InfoSec team say, what about new updates and releases?
Yeah, we can factor that in as required. Yeah, no, it's a big thing. I mean, I've worked with oil and gas companies that want to do this with all of their, the locations of their secret oil wells, and don't want those in the public domain. So yeah, understand the need.